Hey, hello everybody. Tim Hughes here. I'm the CEO and co-founder of DLA Ignite. I'm talking today with Doug Noll, and we're going to be talking about de-escalating angry people, talking with people who may be a little bit emotional. How do we deal with that? And Doug has a wealth of experience of this. Doug, where can people find you?
Tim, people can find me at Doug Noll, DOUGNOLL.com. They can email me at doug@dougnoll.com. And I've got a heavy presence on LinkedIn. So just search for Doug Noll, DOUGNOLL on LinkedIn, and you'll find me there. And you can Google me too. You'll find more about me than you ever want to know.
So Doug, tell us about the background, because you've got a really interesting story, haven't you?
Yeah,
you were trained as a lawyer, and
right. I grew up in Southern California in affluence. Went to Dartmouth College, came back to California, went to law school, did well in law school. Decided I didn't want to live in either the San Francisco Bay Area or the Los Angeles area, so I moved to Central California. Clerked for an appellate judge for a year, and then entered private practice as a young associate. Tried my first jury trial 6 weeks after I joined the firm, and was a trial lawyer for the next 22 years. Without going into the long story of how I moved out of trial law, I ended up in mid-career going back to school to earn my master's degree in peacemaking and conflict studies. And I left a very successful law practice in 2000 to become a mediator and a peacemaker. And the one thing that I didn't have, despite the amazing education I got in my master's degree program, was a way to calm angry people down. And I was being called into high conflict situations where people would rather shoot each other than talk. And I had an epiphany in 2005 about listening to emotions. And basically what I learned in that mediation was that when you focus on listening to and reflecting another person's emotions, they calm down almost instantly. And it was phenomenal. I'd never seen anything like it. It turned out 2 years later that a brain scanning study was published out of Matthew Lieberman's lab at UCLA that showed what happens in the brain when you engage in this process, which is called affect labeling. And once I had the science to explain the practice, I began to develop it and refine it and teach it. I had an opportunity in 2010 with my colleague Laurel Copper to co-found the Prison of Peace Project. And in that project, for the last 14 years, we've been training lifers and long-termers in maximum security prisons around the world how to bring peace to prison by becoming peacemakers and mediators. And the first skill we taught them, do teach them, is how to listen to emotions rather than to words. So we've acid tested this with tens of thousands of people in prison. I wrote a best-selling book in 2017 about this. And today, I, of course, engage in mediation and arbitration, but I do spend a lot of my time training people in these skills because they're absolutely life-transforming.
So give us some more information about this, because I mean, it surely this is a required skill for all of us.
Yes, it's actually a very simple skill to describe. Think of, use the acronym IRR. We could say internal rate of return, but in my work, we could say IRR stands for ignore the words, read the emotions, reflect the emotions with a you statement. And that's all it is. It's learning how to engage in what I call type 2 listening. In type 1 listening, it's all listener focused. We have our own agenda, we're listening, but it's for our own purposes, whatever that might be. And that's the way most people engage in listening. In type 2 listening, the focus is on the speaker, and our intention is to make sure that the speaker feels deeply heard and validated. And so we will use you statements instead of I statements. And if we're affect labeling, which is the deepest level of type 2 listening, then we will simply say something like, Tim, man, you're really frustrated. You're really angry and pissed off. You feel completely disrespected, you feel ignored, you're invisible, and you feel unappreciated and unsupported. And all I'm doing is telling the speaker what their emotional experience is. And what the brain scanning study shows, when you do this, you literally de-escalate, or you diminish or inhibit the emotional centers of the brain and reactivate the prefrontal cortex, the thinking part of the brain. And people literally calm down in 90 seconds or less. And what's really cool is this is an unconscious process. So people don't even know that they're getting calmed down. And yet all of a sudden, boom, all the drama is gone. And now you can engage in a conversation to figure out what's going on and solve a problem or do whatever you have to do. And as I teach my graduate students, always de-escalate first before you problem solve. The problem that most people have is they go right to problem solving when people are upset. And that just makes people, the upset person even more angry. So it's a very simple technique to describe. It takes a little bit of courage to learn because it flies in the face of everything we think we know about listening. And so I say it's counterintuitive and counternormative. It's counterintuitive because we would never think to label somebody else's emotions and tell them what they're feeling. And it's counternormative because in Western society, emotions are considered to be bad. They're evil. They're irrational. Unless they're constrained in very tight boundaries, emotional people are typically engaged in bad behavior. And so we've learned from childhood to basically ignore emotions and put them aside. It's not human to be emotional. That's the claim of the rationalists. And so we're never coached as children how to develop emotional competency. So when you start to learn this technique of affect labeling, you have to overcome a lot of conditioning that tells you that emotions are bad, that if you tell somebody what they're feeling, you're being rude or patronizing or manipulative. None of that's true. But we have all these internal fears that we have to work through. And once you work through them, which only takes 6 to 8 weeks of practice to really get it down, all of a sudden your life changes forever. And my promise to my clients is you will never have another fight or argument again in your life, period. Guaranteed.
It's fascinating because I preparing for this, I went on your website and read your blogs that you've got on LinkedIn, and I've seen you demonstrate it as well. So I know that you say that normally what happens is that there's like we're not wired in a particular way to sort out those things. So what happens is that our emotions and our brain don't work at the same speed. So what happens is immediately we do emotion rather than actually thinking about stuff.
That's right.
And I've seen you demonstrate it, and I've done it with when I've been there with a group with you, where you've actually said and talked to us and said, Tim, you're feeling like this, is that, and everybody just calmed down. It was just amazing watching everybody go, and everyone went, God, I feel so much calmer.
Yeah, exactly. This is all science-based, Tim. It's not psychological BS. It's based on hard science. It's just one of those things about our brain that when we are told what we feel when we're upset, we automatically calm down. And I think what's going on, and there's not science to support this, so this is just my hypothesis, is that when the emotional centers of the brain get activated, it cuts. Daniel Goleman has talked about this. What he calls the amygdala hijack, where when the amygdala and the associated limbic system areas of the brain activate and become highly activated, they basically overwhelm the prefrontal cortex. So we now lose connection to the prefrontal cortex. It's basically shut down. Well, the prefrontal cortex has a database in it of emotions, and when you're cut off from that emotional database, you can no longer process your emotional experience. You're just in it. You're just buried in this avalanche of emotions, and there's just no way you can process it. When we affect label, what we're doing is lending our prefrontal cortex to the upset person's prefrontal cortex for the 90 seconds it takes for that person to start processing the emotional experience. And it happens very rapidly. It's an unconscious process, so people don't even know what you're doing. And they calm down almost instantly because the prefrontal cortex can come back online, get access to the emotional database, start processing the information. And now the emotional center is calmed down because all of a sudden somebody's paying attention inside the brain to what's going on.
It's a bit like when people say you need to count to 10 if something happens. You need to count to 10.
That doesn't work. It'll work if you're in a place where you can walk away and you have the presence of mind to take some deep breaths and pause. But for most people, they don't have the presence of mind to do that. The emotional reaction comes on so fast and so strong that just boom, they're in it. And so all of the old bromides of going out to the balcony, that's from Fisher and Urey, or taking a deep breath, or walk around the block. All good ideas, but those are very slow ways of calming down. And they aren't things that, they're things that you do to yourself if you have the presence of mind to do it. When we're affect labeling, I can, as a listener, I can calm you down. If I told you, hey, Tim, go out and take a break, you're going to get pissed off at me. What do you mean take a break? What's wrong with you, right? And so I can't de-escalate you unless I listen to your emotions. And the reason this became important in my life is because as a high conflict mediator, I get paid a lot of money to walk into a conflict, say between business partners or boards of directors or organizations or even communities. And people, like I said, people have their knives on the table. And I can't tell them what to do. I can't tell them, take a deep breath, calm down. None of that stuff works. I've got to be able to de-escalate them right now to get them into a place where we can talk about the problem. That's why this is so powerful.
So when you when you talked earlier on and said, Tim, you're clearly feeling emotional, and is that where you're making an assumption, or you've actually listened to me because I've vented and therefore I've kind of told you the problems?
One of the reasons why this works so well is that we human beings have a limited repertoire of emotional behaviors.
Right.
And I have figured out how to structure emotional data in a way that allows people to access, as a listener, de-escalator, to access the emotional information that you would be giving me as an upset person. And I can access that information almost instantly with 100% accuracy. So I can literally read your emotional experience and know exactly what you're feeling. And I'll even know about emotions that you're experiencing that you don't even know you're experiencing in the moment. Because emotions come in clusters or waves. And you may feel anger, but you're also going to be feeling a whole bunch of other stuff. And so I can label, I know just from experience that you're going to be feeling all these other emotions. And so you can say, I'm really angry. And I'll say, oh, Tim, you're really angry. You're frustrated. You feel disrespected. You're anxious and concerned and worried. And you feel completely rejected and betrayed. And you don't even know that you have those feelings, but you do have those feelings. And by articulating them and reflecting them back to you, I'm giving your brain a whole bunch of new information to process, which allows you to calm down because you're being heard. Somebody's listening to you.
You've labeled these things type 1 and type 2 listening, haven't you?
Correct. So as I said before, type 1 listening is the kind of listening that we engage in all the time. It's my agenda.
I just basically talk over you, or
exactly, just like you just did right there. Perfect. That's type 1 listening. That's what we all do. Type 2 listening is very different. In type 2 listening, my focus is on you and making sure that you are understood and heard from your frame, from your perspective, from your frame of mind, so that when I listen to you, you experience being validated and deeply heard, which means I have no agenda. I'm not going to ask any questions. I'm not going to ask questions. I'm not going to assume anything. I'm just going to be present in the moment with you and reflect back your experience. And when I do that in type 2 listening, what happens is I lose my ego. I become egoless. And it's what Eckhart Tolle talks about, the power of now. And that's exactly what you experience when you do this. Your ego dissolves. You have this sense of oneness, and you're just present. You're just this present being in the space with this upset person and just reflecting back what they're experiencing in a very calm, compassionate, kind, and graceful way that allows them to calm down. It's really powerful.
You've also talked about the 7 layers of emotion.
Mm-hmm.
I know we haven't got a lot of time.
Okay, so as I said, I had to figure out, what I learned was that our brains do not deal with unstructured data very well. So, and emotions are unstructured data because we've never learned how to organize our thoughts around emotions. So I built up an emotional matrix. And there are 7 layers, and the 7 layers are anger, disrespect, fear, disgust, shame, sadness, and abandonment.
Right.
7 layers. And each of those 7, and they move from the least invasive to the most invasive in terms of the intimate connection. So anger, not very invasive when you tell somebody they're angry. But if you tell somebody you feel completely abandoned and unloved and unlovable, that's pretty intimate. That's pretty deep. And so that's much more invasive. So you work from the least invasive to the most invasive in terms of connection. And then in each of these layers, there's a continuum of emotions. So for example, with anger, you could have anger, frustration, irritation, annoyance. You could have rage. You could have jealousy. You could have hatred. A long continuum. With disrespect, you'd have words like you feel disrespected, you don't feel heard, you feel invisible, you don't feel you feel unsupported, unappreciated. For fear, you can have fear, anxiety, worry, concern, unsure, uncertain, terrified, scared. So you can see there's these continuums. And what I teach is I teach people all this matrix. And once you've got this matrix learned, then when you're listening to somebody, you just plug in to the matrix wherever they are. And it becomes a very simple process to read and reflect another person's emotions, because you've got a framework, a pattern that you can utilize that's 100% effective.
So you're basically working through the structure in terms of
that's correct
of understanding what the person's feeling.
That's right. You don't have to guess at what they're feeling, because every human being, no matter where they are on the planet, has the same basic experiences. And so we can plug those experiences into the matrix and know exactly what they're experiencing and know what to say. So that's why in the training it's so when people come out, they know what to say, when to say it, and how to say it, no matter how intense the situation, because every human behavior is exactly the same. Like a very limited repertoire. What looks like chaos to the untrained eye becomes a pattern that we recognize, and we know exactly what to do with it.
And I guess dealing with doing that before actually doing the problem solving is a bit like the airplane where they say put your mask on before you put on other person's mask.
That's a good analogy. Yes, that's right. The problem that we have is if we don't know how to calm somebody down, then their upset makes us anxious. And we will then unconsciously try to soothe our own anxiety by engaging in a number of behaviors that only make matters worse. And one of those behaviors is early problem solving. Oh, Tim, if you would just do this, then the problem will go away. And of course, you're already really angry. And by me telling you, oh, if you just did this, that is patronizing and rude. And it's not helping you. And all your brain knows is it's not being heard or listened to in the moment. It's being dismissed. It's being invalidated. And so it just makes you angry and more frustrated.
Or criticized or
judged. Emotional invalidation, or for example, maybe you're really angry at me and you're yelling at me. And so what the typical response is to try to apologize or appease or justify, rationalize, explain, justify. All of that's all me oriented. That's type 1 listening. I'm trying to explain myself and justify and rationalize, and thinking that your rational brain, which doesn't exist, by the way, there's no such thing as rationality,
yep.
That your rational brain will calm down, and it doesn't work. All it does is inflame you and enrage you. So we just have to, the secret to all of this is learning how to, like I said, ignore the words, read the emotions, and simply reflect back the emotions with the use statement.
And sorry, Doug.
Really powerful.
Yeah, I've seen it demonstrated, and it is really powerful. But it just feels disingenuous, doesn't it?
When you're looking at this, when I demonstrate this in workshops that I do, the audience looks at me like I'm crazy. That was the rudest, most patronizing thing. You were interrupting her. You're taking away her power. All kinds of criticisms, right? And then I turned to the person that I've been listening to and I said, well, what was your experience? And invariably, I mean, without exception, in thousands of workshops, my partner, whom I've never met before, says to me, I've never felt so deeply listened to before in my life. And the audience I've had situations where they've accused her or him of lying. No, that was horrible. They can't wrap their head around the idea that when you use a you statement and you listen to emotions, that it is deeply validating and soothing to people. But once they've had that moment in the workshop and I let them process through what they're seeing flies in the face of everything they think they know about communication, then I teach them how to do it, and they start practicing it. And all of a sudden the experience changes their perception. I said, oh my God, it works. It's really powerful. And what's really fun about this is it's self-affirming, because when you engage in affect labeling and listen another person into existence, they are so grateful that you have taken the time to really understand them. They'll say, wow, you really get me. Man, thank you for listening to me. You feel so good as the listener because you're giving them a life-affirming experience that you want to do it more. And so just in a very short period of time, it becomes an ingrained habit of who you are. And from now on, wherever you are, you affect label. If I'm at a Starbucks, for example, I'll always ask the barista, hey man, you look really happy today. Or if I'm working with a clerk at the checkout counter at the supermarket, I'll say, man, you look like you're just almost at the end of your shift. You're really excited. I have no clue, of course. And the clerk will either say, yeah, I am. I'm really excited. I'm going home pretty soon. Or, no, I'm in the middle of my shift. So you're a little anxious and worried and tired. Or at the beginning of the shift, no, I just began my shift. I got 8 hours. I said, so you just got to slog through it, huh? And so I affect label them. Or in a restaurant, server comes up. Hi, my name's Doug. I'm your server tonight. Doug, you're looking really happy. You're going to have a great night and make a lot of money on tips. And you get the best service of your life in the restaurant because you listened the server into existence. So there are opportunities every day to practice these skills on perfect strangers. And then you bring it into your career, your work life, and you can calm angry, upset people all the time. If you bring it home, you can build intimacy and trust in your family instantly. This is the way that you deal with children. You, instead of yelling at them when they're upset, you affect label them. You coach them how to be present with their emotions by affect labeling. Your partner has a moment. You don't argue.
Doug, thank you so much for today. Where can people find you?
DougNoll.com, Doug@DougNoll.com. Thanks for cutting me off, Tim. I can go on forever.
Well, thank you so much for today, Doug. It's been really exciting and fascinating. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.